Thatcher speaks with 60 Minutes. Ronald Reagan's personality has proven to be a kind of buffer for him when times get hard. Do you envy that?
No.
Do you find...
I think he's marvelous. As I told you, I'm his greatest fan. We each have our own style. You can't change it. I haven't the slightest intention of changing mine. After all, it hasn't done me so badly so far.
For Joe Hrudka, his first car was the great passion of his life. He spent every spare minute working on the car, polishing it, and cruising around in it, trying to pick up girls. At the time, he had no idea that his obsession with cars would lead directly to this.
When you got out of high school, did they vote you most likely to succeed?
I think they voted me most likely not to succeed.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Harry Reasoner.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Diane Sawyer. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
The Making of a Murderer is the story of Cameron Curley, a young man, a boy really, who beat a man to death in Wichita, Kansas. Every murderer's story is unique, but what makes the story of Cameron Curley especially interesting, especially tragic, is that given his life, it would be surprising if he did not commit some outrageous act. Practically from infancy, Cameron Curley was a time bomb waiting to explode. You are looking at an eyewitness to the fact that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He is one of the world's great losers. His name is Cameron Curley, age 21, serving 15 years to life in a Kansas prison for murder. He admits he did it, beat his adoptive father to death with a baseball bat. But Cameron Curley was condemned practically from birth by forces that claimed they were helping him. It is a tragic, tortuous tale of neglect and incompetence on an international scale. Cameron Curley was born on the Sioux Valley Indian Reservation near Brandon, Manitoba. When he was 6, he saw his father beaten to death in a drunken brawl. Cameron and his brothers and sisters were taken from their alcoholic mother and became wards of the Children's Aid Society. Less than 2 years later, his mother, dead drunk, froze to death. Cameron was sent here to the Maples, then a home for troubled children run by Children's Aid. Within 3 years, Children's Aid of Brandon offered him for adoption to Lutheran Social Services of Wichita, Kansas. Thousands of Canadian Indian children were thus exported. Lutheran Social Services, in turn, already had a father in mind for Cameron, a man named Richard Curley, a Wichita plant manager, a single man. Richard Curley had asked Lutheran Social Services for a 10-year-old Indian boy, and the agency, without even meeting Cameron, completed the paperwork that allowed Curley to drive the 1,000 miles up to Brandon, Manitoba to pick up a new son. He brought him back to Wichita to this house in a cozy middle-class part of town, and here Cameron Curley lived for 8 years. He began drinking almost immediately with the approval of his new father. By the time he was an adolescent, he was an alcoholic. And during those 8 years, he was regularly beaten and homosexually abused by his new father. By Labor Day 1983, Cameron Curley, age 19, was abused enough, drunk enough, and strong enough to beat Richard Curley to death.
What were the sleeping arrangements in that house?
When I got there, my brother was sleeping with my father, and I was sleeping by myself upstairs.
And then?
And then...
Did those arrangements change?
Mm-hmm.
And you had to go down in the basement and sleep with your father?
Yes, after a while.
Was it a regular, continuing thing? Is it something you don't want to talk about?
Not really. It's embarrassing. I hate talking about it.
Just let me ask you, how long did it continue?
For about 2.5 years, 3 years.
And then it stopped. Was there violence involved? Pain? I'll let it be. You kept running away from school.
I was drinking a lot and doing drugs. And, I guess that's where I found my happiness, you know. It was.
You slept in a doghouse once. Hmm? Out in the back of Curley's place.
Mm-hmm.
Why the doghouse?
Because I like my dog a great deal, and that's about the only, I considered him the only friend I had, you know. He never turned against me or nothing like that, you know.
Cameron Curley is a murderer. He is also a victim. He became one the day back in 1976 when Richard Curley applied to Lutheran Social Services specifically for an Indian boy aged about 10. Curley had already adopted one Indian child, Robert, 2 years older, who's been in trouble all his juvenile and adult life. Lutheran Social Services, who'd also arranged that adoption, felt it had a special talent for finding parents for hard-to-place children. The director of Lutheran Social Services was Evelyn Middlestadt.
Was there any background check at all made into Richard Curley?
We contacted references that he gave us that were here in Wichita, but we didn't contact any other than what he gave us.
Is that unusual?
It was not at the time.
Only checking references that the person in question gives you really doesn't tell you much but what that person wants you to know.
That's correct.
Having said that, how on earth does a man like Richard Curley manage to adopt 2 children?
There were no indications in any of his current life or what people knew about him or the way he was functioning that would indicate that he had a severe problem or any kind of serious problems.
Not that one should be suspicious of someone just because they are single, but when they are single and want to adopt children, shouldn't there be at least minor alarm bells going off to perhaps do a more thorough check? Because generally speaking, it's very difficult for single people to adopt.
That's right. Well, in retrospect, there should have been. I mean, looking back now.
What sort of reports did the visits to the home produce? Did the social worker or the counselor ever come back and say, it's very odd, these boys sleep with their father. They don't have their own rooms. Any suggestion of that?
No.
Numbers is the name of the game, body count. How many you place, how many children did you can place? Now, I didn't say successfully place, because I have to ask myself now, what was success?
Moses Thompson worked for Miss Middlestadt. He ran the special adoption program for Lutheran Social Services.
You kind of set out to do something in a small scale, on a small scale, hoping that you will serve the children who have the most needs, the parents who have, can provide the best home. And then you look about and look about over the country and look about what someone else, you placed 60 children this year, someone else placed 120. Then next year you have to outdo what they're doing. You understand what I'm saying?
So it starts out with the best will in the world,
and things just kind of get out of hand. You get lost.
No, that's very incorrect. The concern was getting kids into permanent homes, and I was pretty much behind that, what happened. So it was not numbers.
Practically from the moment Cameron arrived in Wichita, he was in trouble. Minor scrapes with the law, truancy. He kept running away from home, an environment that included shackles and chains and homosexual magazines. But he told no one what went on in the house. No one until he met Betty Nixon. She is an Indian student advisor in the Wichita school system who is trying to deal with Cameron's truancy.
I asked him the questions.
And what did he tell you?
Yes. And that there was sexual abuse.
That he slept with his father?
Yes.
And what did you do about that? What did you do with that information?
I called the judge and told him, since I had already told him that I had Cameron with me. And he asked me if Cameron would testify in court to that. Then he said he could get him out of the home.
I thought it'd be pretty crazy to testify against him. Maybe. Seriously, I thought he was going to kill me or something like that. That's why I said, to hell with him.
Did you try to report it to the Lutheran Social Services, the people who arranged the adoption?
After the first time I picked him up, Miss Middlestead, she told me she didn't owe me any answers. I asked her why was he adopted in the single male parent home. And here this man, the single male parent, adopts a little Indian boy. And I said, how'd you do that? I said. She said, I don't owe you any answers. She said, I don't have to answer your questions.
Betty Nixon never came to me.
She never came to you?
She never came to me.
Did anyone ever come to you?
Regarding homosexuality?
Regarding Cameron?
No one ever did.
Once you told Betty Nixon about what was going on in the house, did you expect something to happen?
Yes, I did. I expected to be taken out of the home, taken back to Canada.
Did you tell anyone else, anyone other than Betty Nixon, about what was going
on? No. I trusted her a great deal. She's the only one I trusted because she was nice and sort of reminded me of my mother, you know. It's like a mother figure, you know.
Back here in Canada, members of Cameron's tribe are trying to get Kansas officials to relent, to send Cameron home to serve his sentence here. The house he was born in on the Manitoba reservation is gone now. It used to stand somewhere over here. Who knows what would have happened to him had he never left this place. It certainly could not have been worse than what did. They've written a song about him, the sad little ballad of Cameron Curley.
You better send Cameron Curley home from Wichita where he's all alone. You better send our young boy home. No more white medicine, that's all he's ever known. You better send our young boy home. You better send Cameron Curley home.
Cameron Curley was not the only Indian child to be uprooted. Thousands were because Canadian officials felt that white foster parents, no matter how distant or unknown, were better than the child's home or the reservation. They unburdened themselves. They exported a problem. Judge Edward Kimmelman of Winnipeg investigated and stopped the practice in 1982.
I've stated in my several reports delivered to the government that little or no regard has been had for the culture and the identity of these children. These children are entitled to know of their culture and their background. I don't think they would find that in a white home, but they were simply placed in a white home. Parents who, with the best of intentions, said, we want a child. I have letters here sent to me by parents who are now experiencing great problems with their 10, their 11, their 12, and their 13-year-old Indian children. If one child is lost to a nation or lost to a family or lost to a tribe, that particular loss I deem as cultural genocide.
But you see, they were not children. They're goods.
It's easier to repair goods than it is to repair people.
Well, there's a closer check on the quality control.
Is there a major villain in this tragedy?
I think a lot of people share the honors of being the villain.
And you're one of them?
Mm-hmm.
There is one more key character in the short, unhappy life of Cameron Curley. One more man to judge him. Robert Helzel of Wichita, the judge who sentenced Cameron to 15 years to life.
As the defense attorney said, he'd been dealt a lousy deck of cards, and I felt sorry for him. But all criminals have excuses or reasons why they do things, and it was a horrible life that he had led. There's no question about that, but the fact still remains that it was, in my judgment, a premeditated murder.
You think there's any hope at all for this boy?
No. No. No.
It's no accident that Margaret Thatcher has been given the honor of addressing a joint session of the U.S. Congress next Wednesday. The Prime Minister of Britain is one of America's biggest fans, and by all accounts, hers is a voice Ronald Reagan always listens to. But the Iron Lady of Britain is having her mettle tested back home these days. The British pound is sagging, the coal miners' strike drags on, and unemployment in England is at an all-time high. She's under personal attack for her severe style and her dogged refusal to compromise. So is she showing the strain? Not Mrs. Thatcher. The shopkeeper's daughter, who grew up in a flat above the grocery store, likes to say she's still just living above the shop. This time, the government here at 10 Downing Street, where the walls are lined with portraits of her illustrious predecessors. Every one of them a man.
You'll say, why isn't my picture there? You don't get put up here until you're a has-been. So I hope it'll be quite some time before I'm put up. Right. Come along, let's go and talk.
The pound is at an all-time low against the U.S. dollar. How much of that is the fault of the United States, whether it be interest rates, refusing to intervene in the dollar, or the indirect effect of the deficit?
I think it's a phenomenon that is very, very difficult to analyze correctly. We don't know quite why. There are certain obvious things. The United States, this enormous country with a wholly free enterprise, strong economy, is the world's safe haven for its savings. It's never had socialism. It's never going to have. It's got Canada to the north. It's not attacked anywhere on its borders. And Mexico to the south. So it is safe. It's safe in freedom. It's safe in justice. It's safe in free enterprise. It is a thrusting, driving, strong economy. So therefore, it should naturally attract quite a lot of the world's savings, and does. Indeed,
but what about Great Britain, we ask, the country that led the world into the Industrial Revolution and now has fallen so far behind? Mrs. Thatcher argued that her country's assets were depleted after World War II, and then that was followed by what she feels is the political scourge of socialism.
But in Britain, we tried this socialist experiment. But many things were nationalized. Regulation shot up. Taxation shot up. And somehow people began to look to the state for their standard of living, to the state to solve their problems rather than solving them themselves. My job has been to turn that around.
Your approach to the economy here, your, some people say strong, some people say intractable approach to the economy here has really cost you a price. And we were taking a look at a poll that I know you must have seen out just recently, in which 21%, only 21% of the people in this poll said they thought you understood the problems facing Britain today. 34% of them, only 34%, thought you were good in a crisis. How does something like this happen, these kinds of figures, this kind of reaction?
I don't really take much notice of polls between elections. There's only one poll I'm interested in, and that's whether they're going to return me, whether they've sufficient confidence in the way I've handled things to return the government I lead to office, which they did, with a very large majority. But it's not the job of a politician to do only those things which you think will be popular.
But as you know, a lot of people have turned it back on you and your style, and they say that you don't feel a healthy sense of compassion. And they say, I think it was Edward Heath, your predecessor, your party, who said, people are not motivated by being hectored and lectured and by the refrain of cut, cut, cut.
How quite absurd. Those people who talk most about compassion are often those people who define compassion as getting the state to spend more on their particular interest. I heard a great deal about compassion from my opponents, the Labour Party. But it's the Labour Party that supported every strike, supported the miners' strike through thick and thin. And the miners' strike, the objective was to stop the supply of power to industry so that it could bring industry and people to a dead stop so they wouldn't have jobs or a future, and to stop the supply of fuel to houses so they'd have stopped it to the housewife and to old people. They're the people who talk about compassion. We don't talk so much about it. We just quietly get on with the job.
But as you know, Ronald Reagan's personality has proven to be a kind of buffer for him when times get hard. Do you envy that?
No.
Do you find...
I think he's marvelous. As I told you, I'm his greatest fan. We each have our own style. You can't change it. I haven't the slightest intention of changing mine. After all, it hasn't done me so badly so far.
Not so badly indeed for the daughter of a man who had little formal education, but who taught her to believe in self-improvement and duty above all. She graduated from Oxford in chemistry. She got a law degree and had run for Parliament twice, unsuccessfully, by the time she married businessman Dennis Thatcher. She had twins and a Parliament seat by the age of 34. She still says she owes all this to her father and to the flat above the grocery store in a little country town 100 miles north of London. A flat which had no indoor plumbing, but gave her a window on the world.
As you see, it was a corner grocer's shop, but people came to it from all over the town. And I think children nowadays don't quite understand that kind of shop because we tend to go to supermarkets. But the corner shop and the grocer's shop, and there was also a post office in it, was very much a kind of center of social life, as well as being a grocer's shop, because we stayed open...
conversation.
Oh, very much so, because we stayed open until 8 o'clock on Friday and 9 o'clock on Saturday. And people would come in for something late in the evening and stand and talk. And they would always stand and talk about the political things of the day. And that, I was a child and I used to listen. I used to love listening to what my elders said. It was so much more interesting than what my contemporaries said.
But those talks at the corner grocery store could hardly have prepared her for the peculiar British institution known as Question Time in the British House of Commons. To the astonishment of Americans, twice a week, those symbols of civilized behavior, British MPs, engage in a raucous shouting match with the head of government on everything from milk prices to the lingering controversies about the Falklands War. Television is not permitted, radio and sketches are.
Order. The honourable's in order.
Mr. Speaker, I told the right honourable gentleman, and I must ask him explicitly to accept what I say. I must ask him explicitly to accept that I was not involved in the decision to prosecute a particular person. He knows that is correct, and I must ask him to accept it. Otherwise, he is making a very grave accusation indeed.
We, for instance, hear you in Question Time with Parliament, and it seems to us in the United States like a kind of institutionalized rudeness. Does it take guts to go in and do that twice a week, or do you enjoy doing that?
No, it's just part of life. It's a thing which very, very few prime ministers have to do. Twice a week I have to go before Parliament and answer questions and haven't a clue what those questions will be most of them.
Do you like the confrontational quality of it?
Like it. I just sometimes wish that they were more interested in the answers. The purpose of the questions is not to find the answers, but to try to trip you up. But, you know, it is very useful because in doing the briefing for it, which I do twice a week, you find out pretty nearly everything that's going on. And it often enables you to take action very quickly. And also people know that they can't get you down. And that's quite a good thing. Quite a good thing.
Do you like television as a medium? There's been much discussion this political season in the United States about the effects of television on personalities and people. And I read once that you said you think that television interviews often take the life's blood out of real people.
They do. They're flat. I mean, I find that when I go about, people find me very different from television. I don't know why, because I never watch myself on television. And it's highly selective. You know, you ask a few questions, and it is so, well, just selective. But it's brought a great deal of richness to life, a great deal of knowledge to life. But I'm always nervous of it, of course, very nervous.
Last October of '84, terrorists tried to kill you. The IRA claimed responsibility. Do you believe that those in the United States who support Irish relief funds and who send money into Northern Ireland are supporting terrorism?
Oh, yes, they are. Those who send money to NorAid are supporting the supply of guns and ammunition with which to kill British soldiers, British policemen, innocent British citizens, not only in Northern Ireland, and also to damage and injure sometimes some Americans who are over here. Oh, yes, that is what they're doing.
But you said you realized that they didn't intend for you to see another day.
Look, every person in politics in the Western world takes that risk. And you just carry on. And we don't really think of it. We're deeply grateful to those who protect us. One day it may happen. But my goodness me, the gunman is not going to stop us from carrying out the business of democracy. Ever. He will fail. And people must help him to fail by cutting off the money and supplies of armaments he needs.
If she talks tough about terrorists, she is equally tough about communists. In fact, the Soviet press was the first to call her the Iron Lady. That's why people were surprised after a recent visit to London by Mikhail Gorbachev, one of the top contenders for the Soviet leadership. Some people complained that Mrs. Thatcher was, for her, positively gushy. People were sort of perplexed when they heard you say of Mr. Gorbachev, "I like Mr. Gorbachev." You also went on to say...
personality, I can do business with him because I accept certain things. Communism is going to stay in the Soviet Union and its satellites for a long time. It is the most rigid doctrine I have ever come across. It's not built in the means to adapt. They are prepared to pursue their aims by military means, and we have to see that we're strong enough to stop them. But I do believe this, that there's a generation in power in the Kremlin who remembers the terrors and horrors of the last war. And they would be very slow to embark on another major war. We've got to use that. So you have to negotiate on armaments, get the numbers down, and you know, you do negotiate better when you have more contacts and understand the personalities you're dealing with. So yes, I did. We did get on. We didn't have what I call the minuets of diplomacy, you know, the set pieces. We sat down and talked, rather as I'm talking to you. Now let's talk about the things that really matter. And he was prepared to talk. And so, yes, we have to do business. And I can do business. And I'm glad he came.
You've said that you want to stand for a third term.
But of course. Of course, I'm so sorry. In the United States, you can't, because you have 2 4-year terms. We could stand for a third term. And I hope to stand for a third term.
I read once, too, that you said that a woman is in her prime between the ages of 50 and 57. Do you want to amend that now?
I've never heard that either. Isn't that astonishing? I can't think when I said that. If I ever said it.
Oh, really? I've got it down for 1975. I don't know. I thought that was curious, too.
Goodness me. We'll have to amend that, because I'm 60 this year.
That's right. That's right. I think it could be an infinitely extended observation.
I will extend it. One is always young to oneself and one's contemporaries, you know.
There are not times when you just want to pack it in?
No. No, I don't. I never want to pack it in. Of course I will have to one day. Of course I will have to. But I don't want to pack it in for quite a time yet. I still think, maybe you don't like the style, but I still think a firm hand's needed.
"60 Minutes, a CBS News weekly magazine, will continue.
Whatever happened to little Joe Hrudka, the kid from Cleveland who lived over the bar and grill, the kid who wasn't doing that well at school, because he was always fooling around with his car. In fact, he spent most of his life under the hood of a car. The kid who dropped out of college after one semester because he was drag racing every weekend. Whatever happened to little Joe Hrudka? This is what happened to Joe Hrudka. He now lives the kind of privileged existence once reserved for landed gentry and robber barons in a place called Roundwood, a 43-room estate in Hunting Valley, Ohio, Cleveland's fanciest suburb. Just to give you some idea of its size, the average house is 1,700 square feet. This place, the biggest house in Northeast Ohio, is over 50,000 square feet. You could fit almost 30 average houses inside it. The master bedroom, for instance, not only holds a grand piano, but seems big enough to hold the entire Cleveland Orchestra with it. Joe Hrudka lives here with his second wife, Denise, and their 3 children. They bought the house 5 years ago for $2 million and spent over $2 million more scraping, plastering, and painting it back to its former elegance. Just as he used to love showing off his cars when he was a kid, Joe loves showing the house, which features, among other things, 98 thermostats. One of them runs this modest little room with its year-round Olympic-sized swimming pool and jacuzzi. The heating bill for this room alone would probably run half the block around this bar and grill on the wrong side of the tracks on Cleveland's west side, where Joe Hrudka grew up. This is the Western Cafe, owned by Joe Hrudka's parents, and if you're looking for a key to this unique success story, this is where you have to start.
We lived a little bit poorly because we lived above the tavern at that time. We didn't really have a home, so the tavern and the upstairs was part of the house. So that was my life, was being in that business.
For Joe Hrudka, his first car was the great passion of his life. He spent every spare minute working on the car, polishing it, and cruising around in it, trying to pick up girls. At the time, he had no idea that his obsession with cars would lead directly to this.
When you got out of high school, did they vote you most likely to succeed?
I think they voted me most likely not to succeed because I was the one that was always tinkering around with my car. And back then, anybody that tinkered with their car was kind of an outlaw.
Who were your heroes then? James Dean?
That's correct. You knew that. That James Dean was in those days. James Dean was the most popular kind of the outlaw type. We used to cater ourselves after the James Dean type look and actions.
After high school, Joe stopped trying to be an outlaw long enough to start college. But on weekends, he began drag racing his '57 Chevrolet.
1 month after I was in school, I came home on the weekend to see my family. And the thing I brought home from the weekend before was a little trophy that I won drag racing. And my father, he went crazy. He says, "How could you go to college and end up with a drag racing trophy?" He says, "You got to stay at school. You can't be out racing your car."
He got so good at it, he quit college and took his '57 Chevrolet. He now has a collection of 16 of them, perfectly restored, and began entering the big events. In 1961 and '62, along with his brother, he won the Nationals in his class. It was while he was racing that he noticed that his exhaust gasket kept burning out, and he designed one that used aerospace material. It stopped the problem.
And some of my friends at the races would see this, and they said, "Geez, could we have a set of those gaskets?" So I said, "Sure, I'll sell you a set for $1." So it started out that way, and sooner or later we were selling a few sets of gaskets. Some we would be giving away free. And a friend of mine said, "Geez, Joe, why don't you put those gaskets in a little bag and I'll hang them up in the store and we'll sell them." And that's when I started Mr. Gasket Company.
If you build a better gasket, part of the world at least will beat a path to your exhaust pipe. This is a gasket. In case you already know that, be patient for a minute. This is an exhaust gasket. When a driving engine meets your exhaust flange, this gasket helps keep them apart and the red-hot metal from leaking air. This became the foundation of his auto parts empire and is still its major seller. In 2 years, sales were up to $600,000. In another 2, they were at $3 million, and the company went public. 2 years later, in 1971, the giant conglomerate W.R. Grace acquired the company for $17 million. Joe Hrudka, at the age of 31, was a multi-millionaire.
When Grace took over, you had a staff who were mostly men with dirt under their fingernails. What kind of people did Grace bring in? MBAs?
Yes, they brought in people that were Harvard graduates, and they brought in people from other industries. And that is good in a lot of cases. It's just that for you to be successful in this business, you have to understand the product, you have to understand the automobile, and you have to understand what that customer really wants. And if you didn't have that self-experience, it's very hard to ever learn in a textbook.
For the first 3 years after the sale, Joe went into the business every day. Gradually, his cronies were replaced by people from the conglomerate's management team. After that, Joe became a consultant, only he was never consulted. But of course, he was already rich enough to never work again, so he spent his time acquiring mansions like this one in Palm Springs, California, reading the Wall Street Journal, playing the stock market. This went on for 7 years. Then, in 1981, 10 years after the sale, Joe Hrudka began to get restless and was thinking about starting up another small business in the automotive field.
And at that particular time, Howard Gardner, I contacted again, who's a very close financial man of mine. And I says, Howard, why don't you check with W.R. Grace to make sure that they're satisfied that my non-compete clause is ended, because they have a staff of lawyers that would like to do nothing else but harass you probably. And about a few weeks later, he got a phone call and says, why don't you consider buying your company back? And Howard called me, and I just about fell off my chair. I says, that's great, Howard, but I'm not going to give back the $17 million. And he laughed, and he said, well, let's at least let them come down and tell us what they would be willing to do.
What they were willing to do, finally, in a market where the performance parts industry was slumping, was to sell the company back to Joe Hrudka for the value of its assets, $4 million, $13 million less than they paid for it. 10 years after selling, and just as the market began turning around, Joe Hrudka had his company back.
So it's your company again. What did you do with all the MBAs?
Well, the first time when I came back, we got rid of 85 people. And most of them were their people. And I brought back all the old people that I could. And it was very exciting that I could get a lot of my old people back. So I more or less assembled the old team from back in 1970.
What's the company worth now?
It's a public company now, and it has a stock value of probably $150 million.
From $4 million to $150 million in a little over 2 years. Joe Hrudka performed this feat with very little formal education. He quit college after one semester because he came to this conclusion.
If everybody in school was so smart, these professors, that they would be rich. And I never found a rich one. So I said, I'm going to get out of this school, and I'm going to go out and find my own business.
He attributes his success to two things. One of them is his discipline.
I've never tasted beer, I've never smoked a cigarette, and I've never had coffee in my life.
The other is old-fashioned work ethic.
I work probably 7 days a week and 14 or 15 hours a day.
No one gets to the top without a few eccentricities, and Joe Hrudka's is neatness. It's his obsession. Here he is at this desk just before we filmed him working. He stopped several times on the tour of the house to pick up pieces of lint.
I like to keep my closet nice and neat. I always like my shoes perfect. I like my factories to be nice and clean. I like to be able to feel that you can eat off the floors when you go through them.
What are your extravagances? What do you do that you can't justify on the bottom line?
There's really nothing that I can't justify. I still go back to my father's first teachings was don't never lose the value of a dollar. And there's a lot of things that I could buy that I don't buy. And there's probably not too many things I can't buy. And I think when you're in that position, you don't really buy a lot of things that you normally would have. I don't really feel that I buy something unless I can justify it.
We didn't ask Joe Hrudka to justify this, the latest addition to his collection of houses. This mansion, formerly owned by F. Woolworth Donahue, sits smack on the Atlantic Ocean on the Gold Coast of Palm Beach, Florida. After 18 months of restoration, the house is now estimated at a cool $12 million.
Joe, I've seen your house in Cleveland. And believe me, you don't need another house. And you're about to build an even bigger house in Scottsdale outside Phoenix.
That's our plans now, and that'll be our ultimate.
How big will the Arizona house be?
The one in Cleveland has a lot of basements and a lot of garages and that, and a lot of attics, where the one in Scottsdale will be all usable, livable space, and that'll be like 45,000 square feet.
That's a big house.
Well, it'll be one of the bigger homes in the western part of the United States.
Denise, let's pretend that Joe isn't here. What's it like being around Joe Hrudka all the time?
It's busy.
Does he ever get off the phone?
No, never. From the time he walks in from work in the evening, which is late, he's on the phone, and I'm in bed probably around midnight, and he's still on the phone.
When you're at home, how much time do you spend working?
Generally, now that I'm back to work since I took off those 10 years, I'm working at every moment that I'm really up. And, you know, I may not look like I'm working, but I'm thinking about it.
This is the heart and center of Palm Beach society, or whatever's left of it. Would you like to be a part of this?
Oh, I wouldn't mind seeing what it's all about. It's not that I have to be a part of it. I guess it has some great tradition.
Are you going to give parties?
Oh, maybe we'll save it and have one great party for some great occasion and let everybody see what we've done here.
Being in Palm Beach is one thing. Getting into the right clubs like Bath and Tennis and being on the A party list is something else. Much of what happens to the Hrudkas may depend on people like William E. Hutton III, whose family has been coming here since the 1920s.
When they move into Palm Beach, will the town give them a fair shake?
It depends upon what they want to do themselves within the community, if they want to be low-key or if they want to have a high exposure. That's entirely up to them.
Do some people blow it?
They have in the past, yes. They've overspent, or they've not been acceptable, so to speak, because of their garish way of life. And people in the town have paid little heed to them because, and this is a rather peculiar place, you really can't buy your way into Palm Beach. It's something, it's hard to say. You don't necessarily earn it, but you are accepted or you're not. But then again, there are so many diverse groups of people in this town that no matter who you are, you're bound to fit in somewhere.
Okay, wait a minute now. I'm coming closer.
This looks like a good beginning. Town and Country magazine has come to see Joe and Denise Hrudka for a photo session with the magazine's Slim Aarons, photographer to the rich and famous.
Denise, never turn your face away from the camera. You're the star. Here we go. Joey, you happy?
Look happy, Joe. Today it's town and country layouts and multi-million-dollar Palm Beach mansions. But it wasn't that long ago when it was a little apartment over the bar and grill. Joe Hrudka is as near as we've run into lately, the personification of one version of the American dream. It may not be your dream, but I'll bet if you're honest, a part of you says, uncritically, what a part of me did. When I grow up, I want to be just like Joe Hrudka.
Lots of us got Valentines this week. Andy decided to check out this year's crop.
These were a lot cheaper Friday, the day after Valentine's Day, than they were last Tuesday. A Valentine should be sweet and simple, I think, and red for the one I love, remembering you on Valentine's Day. I like the ones with a cutout of a heart on it. You open them up, and there's a message inside, a Valentine for you. I can't get over how much some of these cost. This one was $2. The poetry is always bad in a Valentine, and that's the way it ought to be, I think. A Valentine to keep in touch with someone I think about so much. I mean, that's bad poetry. There are a lot of dirty Valentines this year. A Valentine should be more about love than sex. I don't wonder this one was left over the day after Valentine's Day to a fine person. I mean, I don't want a sexy Valentine, but to a fine person's going too far the other way. This one just says, have a nice day. Have a nice day isn't a Valentine's Day message. This is to someone special. The special thing about it is it costs $4.95 and plays a song. None of us is agreed on what we call our mother and father. Mom and pop, mom and dad, mother and father, and mother and dad. This seems like sort of a cheap trick from both of us. I mean, if you really love someone, it doesn't seem as though you ought to chip in with someone else and buy one card between the two of you. And I question this one for Dad and his wife. You get it? These card companies are touching every base. Dear old Dad has been divorced and remarried, and this is for the kid who wants to send him a card. My question is this: how does dear old Mom, wherever she is, feel about it? Well, here's the answer to that. For Mom and her husband. That's where dear old Mom is. She's got herself another guy. We've come a long way. Used to be you only sent a Valentine when you really meant it. You didn't send one to every Tom, Dick, and Mary. Sometimes you'd slip one in a girl's desk at school and not even put your name on it. All it said was, "Will you be my Valentine?" I like Valentine's Day. The trouble is there's too much commercial money in it now. The florists and the candy makers and the card people are all advertising so much, you don't dare let the day go by without making an offering, whether you mean it or not.
The mail this week told us one thing for sure, that when viewers don't like what they've seen, they let us know. And a lot of you didn't like our segment on police hostage training. One viewer called it the dumbest thing I've ever seen you do. To devote 30 minutes to play-acting police personnel was ridiculous. Another wrote, what was it supposed to prove? It seemed more helpful to the hostage taker than the viewer. Another found it better suited as a training film for police rather than for the general public. And a viewer in Massachusetts found it as interesting as changing the oil in my pickup. Next week, I'll let you watch. And a number of you echoed this viewer. How many disgruntled, unemployed, potential kooks watched and got big ideas of making headlines for themselves? Our hostage story wasn't the only segment last week that drew a lot of irate mail. So did Andy Rooney's essay, in which he showed actors reacting to President Reagan's State of the Union message. I'm ashamed of you, Andy, wrote one viewer. The president deserves more respect. Another viewer wrote, it must have been a slow week for Andy Rooney to have to resort to making fun of President Reagan. But another viewer thought it was the funniest thing I've seen on television since the State of the Union speech itself. And another sent Andy this Valentine. I laughed out loud for the first time in 4 years. Andy, I love you. I'm Mike Wallace. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.
They've written a song about him, the sad little ballad of Cameron Curley.
You better send Cameron Curley home from Wichita, where he's all alone. You better send Diane Boy home. No more white medicine, that's all he's ever known. You better send Diane Boy home.
Later tonight on Crazy Like a Fox, a notorious swindler goes to Harry for help. But first, a renowned artist has a close brush with death on Murder, She Wrote, next.
15 years, little time. Now he's living inside